And we're halfway through my notes on verse 5. A little over halfway through my notes. So there was right at about 2 pages of notes on verse 5. So let's see. So last week, we're still right in the middle of that first section, or that second section of Colossians 1, where Paul is giving thanks for them. You know, he's been given a report from the fellow prisoner, Epaphras, not Epaphroditus. Those are different. And anyway, so he's been given a report from Epaphras, and now he's introducing the book, and he's saying, you know, I'm thankful for the report that I got from Epaphras. So Colossians 1, verse 5, let's pick up there, read verse 5, and then we'll start making some comments on it again. Paul writes, because of the hope, I'm thankful because of the hope which is laid up for you in heaven, of which you heard before in the word of the truth of the gospel. Last week we talked about, right at the tail end of class, how hope cannot just be randomly achieved, right? Think about, this is what we talked about right at the tail end of class last week. Think about the Apollo missions, right? They hoped to get to the moon, but what did they do to ensure that they got to the moon? They researched it heavily, right? Hope has to have research behind it. Sometimes you're going to hear that the biblical definition of hope is desire plus expectation, and that expectation comes via research, right? It comes via study. It comes from diligent effort, right? If you just aim a rocket out into outer space, you're not going to reach the moon. You have to make sure that your math checks out in order to have a reasonable expectation of hitting the moon, right? If you want to get to heaven, you have to likewise put forth diligent effort, maybe not as intricate as those rocket science do, but you have to put forth diligent effort in order to make sure that you are heaven bound. Right? So that's what we talked about at the tail end of class. Picking up right there in our notes, the Colossians had true hope because they had researched that hope. They heard in the word of the truth of the gospel. Let's talk about the word of the truth of the gospel for a few moments. This is a bit of a tricky question, when was the New Testament given? That's a tricky question. Why? Because it can be answered a few different ways, right? Yeah, but depending on how we define the New Testament, right? So if we defined it as Matthew through Revelation, when was the New Testament completed? When were the books finished written? Written, yeah. Which was the last book written? Revelation, right? And anybody know about when Revelation was finished? Yes. So it was either finished in AD 70, just before AD 70, or was finished in about AD 90, right? Depending on what you think Revelation is about. Some think it's about the fall of Israel, which, Jerusalem famously fell in AD 70, or some think it's about the fall of Rome, which Rome would have fallen a few centuries later. But there's some prophecies that kind of hint at Diocletian being the current emperor instead of Nero being the current emperor. Anyway, so the New Testament, the written New Testament, we'll define it that way. The written New Testament was completed by at least 100 AD. Right, so Jesus is born 0 BC, 0 AD. Jesus dies at about 33 AD. 67 years later is whenever the New Testament is finished being written. Okay, that's the written New Testament. Another way that we can define the New Testament is the religious aspect of the New Testament. Big word here that we're going to use is dispensation. All right. Anybody know what dispensation